Think about the last time you decided to change something about your life. Maybe it was your health. You were going to start exercising, eat better, take care of your body the way you always knew you should. Maybe it was your career. You were going to finally pursue the work that actually meant something to you. Stop settling. Stop deferring that ambition to some future version of yourself who would be more ready, more confident, more prepared. Maybe it was a habit, a relationship pattern, a way of thinking about yourself that you recognized clearly and honestly was holding you back. You decided to change. You felt it, the clarity, the conviction, the genuine surge of motivation that said, "This time is different. This time I mean it." And then, a week passed, a month, and the change that felt so certain, so necessary, so close, didn't happen. Or it started and then faded, or it lasted until the first real obstacle arrived and then dissolved, as if the decision had never been made. And somewhere in the quiet of an ordinary day, you asked yourself a question that most people are too uncomfortable to ask directly. Why can't I change? Why, knowing what I know, feeling what I feel, wanting what I want, why do I keep ending up exactly where I started? That question deserves a real answer, not a motivational speech that skips over the difficulty, not a list of tips that treats the symptom without addressing the cause. A real, honest, unflinching answer, because here is the truth. Most people never change. Not because they are weak, not because they are stupid, not because they don't want to, but because they fundamentally misunderstand what change actually is, how it actually works, and what it actually requires. Today we are going to correct that misunderstanding, and in doing so, we are going to give you something far more valuable than another round of motivation. We are going to give you clarity, the kind of clarity that makes real, lasting change not just possible, but inevitable. Let us begin with the first and most fundamental reason why most people never change. They are trying to change their behavior without changing their identity. This is the deepest insight in the entire psychology of change, and it is the one that almost every self-help book, every productivity system, every motivational framework gets wrong, or at least gets backwards. Most approaches to change start with outcomes. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to earn more money. I want to have better relationships. And then they work backwards to behaviors. To achieve that outcome, I need to do these things. Exercise this many times a week. Save this percentage of my income. Spend this much time investing in my relationships. And the behaviors make sense. They are the right behaviors, but they do not stick. Because they are being asked to run on a foundation, a sense of identity that has not changed. Here is what I mean. If you believe at the deepest level that you are someone who is not athletic, that exercise is something other people do, people who are naturally fit and disciplined, not you, then every trip to the gym is an act of violence against your self-concept. It feels wrong. It feels like pretending. And the moment your motivation dips, the moment life gets complicated, your behavior snaps back to the identity it was always serving. The identity of someone who does not exercise. The person who successfully changes their relationship with fitness does not do it by forcing themselves to exercise more. They do it by changing who they believe they are. By beginning, slowly, through small actions, through accumulated evidence, to see themselves as someone who takes their physical health seriously, as someone for whom movement is a natural part of life, as an athlete perhaps, even a very modest one. The behavior follows the identity, not the other way around. Ask yourself honestly what you believe about yourself in the area where you most want to change. Not what you wish you believed, what you actually believe, what the quiet voice says when no one is listening. And notice whether that belief is serving the change you want to make, or whether it is the very thing that is preventing it. Because you will always eventually act in accordance with who you believe you are. The most powerful question in the psychology of change is not what do I want to do differently, It is, who do I need to become? The second reason most people never change is that they underestimate the power of environment. We like to believe that we are the authors of our behavior, that we make choices based on our values and our intentions, independent of the circumstances around us. This belief is flattering. It is also largely false. The research in behavioral psychology is overwhelming on this point. Human beings are far more influenced by their environment than they recognize or like to admit. The food you eat is largely determined by what is in your kitchen. The amount you exercise is largely determined by whether your gym is on your route to work. The quality of your thinking is largely determined by the people you spend the most time around. The habits you maintain are largely determined by whether the cues that trigger them are present or absent in your daily environment. This means that the person who is trying to change their behavior while keeping their environment exactly the same is fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Every day, the same cues trigger the same patterns. The same context pulls toward the same responses. The same people, with their same assumptions about who you are and what you do, quietly but powerfully reinforce the version of you that existed before the decision to change. The people who change successfully change their environment deliberately. They remove the cues that trigger the behaviors they want to eliminate. They create the cues that trigger the behaviors they want to establish. They invest in relationships with people who already embody the identity they are building toward. They design their physical space to make the right choice the easy choice and the wrong choice the effortful one. This is not weakness. This is intelligence. It is the recognition that willpower is finite and unreliable, and that the person who relies on willpower alone to sustain change will eventually run out of it. But the person who has designed their environment to support the change they want, that person has created a system that works even on the days when motivation is absent and willpower is depleted. Look at your environment, honestly and specifically. What in your immediate surroundings is pulling you toward the person you want to stop being? And what changes, small, concrete, immediately actionable, would make your environment a better ally in becoming the person you want to be? The third reason most people never change is perhaps the most psychologically complex. It is this: change is perceived, unconsciously but powerfully, as a threat. Not just a challenge, a threat. To your sense of safety, to your sense of belonging, to the relationships and social structures that have been built around the person you currently are. Let me explain what I mean. You exist within a social ecosystem. Your family has a set of assumptions about who you are. Your friends have a set of expectations about how you behave. Your colleagues have a mental model of your capabilities and limitations. Your community has a story about what kind of person you are. These assumptions and expectations are not neutral. They are load-bearing. They are part of the structure that holds your social world together. And when you change, when you genuinely, significantly change, you disrupt that structure. You become someone that the people around you no longer fully recognize, someone whose behavior no longer confirms the story they have been telling about you. Some people welcome this. They celebrate your growth. They update their understanding of you with curiosity and genuine support. But many people, not out of malice, but out of the deep human instinct toward homeostasis, toward the preservation of familiar patterns, will, consciously or unconsciously, resist your change. They will make jokes about your new habits. They will express skepticism about your new direction. They will remind you, gently or not so gently, of the person you used to be. They will be most comfortable when you return to the version of yourself they have always known. And your nervous system, which evolved to treat social rejection as a survival threat, registers this resistance as danger. The change feels not just difficult, but unsafe, and so it stops. This is why so many people change briefly in contexts that are removed from their ordinary social environment, at a retreat, during a period of travel, after a significant life event, and then slowly revert to their old patterns once they return to the people and places that reinforce the old identity. To change permanently, you often need to change your social environment alongside your internal one. Not necessarily by abandoning the people you love, but by finding, actively and intentionally, people who know the new version of you. People for whom your changed identity is the baseline, not the deviation. People who will reinforce your growth rather than your reversion. The fourth reason most people never change is the one that is least talked about and most important. It is the role of pain. Specifically, most people do not change until the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of changing. Change is uncomfortable. It requires effort. It requires tolerating uncertainty. It requires the willingness to be a beginner again, to be imperfect, to fail and try again and fail differently. It requires giving up something familiar, even if that familiar thing is making you miserable, in exchange for something unknown. And as long as the familiar misery is less painful than the unfamiliar uncertainty, most people will choose the familiar misery every time. This is not irrational. The human brain is wired to prefer known negatives over unknown possibilities. The devil you know is genuinely preferable from a neurological standpoint to the devil you don't. Certainty, even certain suffering, feels safer than uncertainty, even uncertain improvement. This is why the people who change most dramatically are often people who have hit what is sometimes called a bottom, a point at which the familiar misery has become so acute, so undeniable, so completely incompatible with continued functioning that the brain finally recalculates, finally decides that the unknown is worth the risk. But you do not have to wait for a bottom. You do not have to wait until your health fails, your relationship collapses, your career implodes, before the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of changing. You can make that calculation deliberately, right now, before the crisis arrives. Ask yourself, if I do not change, if I continue exactly as I am, making the same choices, maintaining the same patterns, deferring the same growth, where will I be in 5 years? In 10? In 20? What does that life look like? What have I lost? What have I never built? What does the person I could have been look like from the perspective of the person I settled for becoming? Make the future cost of not changing vivid, real, felt in your body, not just understood in your mind. Because the brain responds to emotional reality, not to intellectual understanding. And when the future cost of staying the same becomes genuinely more painful than the present cost of changing, the calculation shifts. The resistance weakens, and change becomes not just possible, but necessary. The fifth reason, and this one is both simple and devastating, is that most people try to change too much at once. They are inspired, they are motivated, they have clarity about everything that needs to be different. And so they attempt to change everything at once. The diet, the exercise, the sleep, the work habits, the relationship patterns, the financial behavior. All of it, starting Monday. And for a brief, glorious period, it works. The momentum of the initial decision carries them through the first few days. And then life happens. One thing slips. The diet breaks on Thursday because of a difficult day at work. And that slip, that single deviation from the perfect plan, triggers something that psychologists call the what the hell effect. I've already blown it. The whole system is compromised. What's the point? And the entire attempt at change collapses, not from failure of will, but from the structure of the plan itself, which was too fragile, too all or nothing, too dependent on perfection to survive contact with reality. The people who change successfully change one thing, one specific, concrete, small enough to be achievable thing. And they change it so thoroughly, so completely, so deeply that it stops being a behavior they practice and becomes a part of who they are. And then they change the next thing. This is slow. It is frustratingly, maddeningly slow compared to the vision of total transformation that motivated the attempt. But it is real, it is sustainable, and it compounds. Because each small change, successfully integrated, builds the evidence that change is possible for you, that you are someone who changes. That identity, the identity of someone who grows, who improves, who keeps the promises they make to themselves, is the most valuable identity you can build. Because once it is established, it becomes self-reinforcing. Change becomes easier, not harder, with each successful iteration. Start small. Start with one thing. Finish it. Then begin again. Now let us talk about the thing that most people are waiting for that will never arrive. The feeling of being ready. Readiness, as most people imagine it, is a feeling. A state of sufficient confidence, sufficient clarity, sufficient preparation, sufficient motivation that action feels natural and inevitable, rather than forced and terrifying. Most people are waiting for that feeling before they begin to change. It does not come, not reliably, not consistently, not in the moments when it is most needed, because the brain does not generate the feeling of readiness before action. It generates it after. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It is a product of it. You become confident that you can exercise by exercising. You become confident that you can write by writing. You become confident that you can change by changing, by beginning imperfectly with whatever you have and discovering through the act itself that you are more capable than you believed. Action precedes feeling. This is one of the most important insights in all of behavioral science, and it is the direct opposite of how most people approach change. Most people wait to feel motivated before they act. The people who change successfully act first and trust that the feeling will follow. It does. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but it follows. Begin before you are ready, because ready is a story your fear is telling you to keep you where you are. And here is the final truth about why most people never change. The one that underlies everything else we have discussed. They do not believe they deserve to. Not consciously, not in so many words, but somewhere beneath the strategies and the plans and the motivational moments, there is a quiet, persistent, deeply embedded belief that who they are right now is who they fundamentally are. That the limits they have encountered are their actual limits. That the life they are living is somehow the life they were meant to live. That transformation of the kind they imagine is for other people, more gifted, more fortunate, more inherently worthy people, not for them. This belief is a lie. A well-constructed, deeply familiar, extraordinarily convincing lie, but a lie. Every human being who has ever changed significantly started from a place of not yet having changed. Every person you admire for their discipline, their achievement, their psychological strength, there was a version of them that was none of those things, that was lost or stuck or convinced that change was beyond them. The change happened not because they were special, but because they decided, truly decided at the level of identity and not just intention, that the story they had been telling about themselves was not the final one, that they were not a finished product, that the past was data, not destiny. You are not a finished product. Everything that has happened to you, every failure, every setback, every pattern you are ashamed of, every version of yourself you have disappointed, is data. It tells you something about where you have been. It tells you nothing definitive about where you can go. Change is possible for you, not as a platitude, not as motivational noise, but as a fact grounded in the actual science of human neuroplasticity, behavioral psychology, and the documented reality of millions of people who have made the journey from where you are to somewhere genuinely different. But it will not happen by accident. It will not happen through motivation alone. It will not happen through the right book, or the right podcast, or the right moment of clarity, however powerful that moment feels. It will happen when you change your identity not just your behavior. When you change your environment, not just your intentions. When you face the social resistance honestly and build new alliances. When you make the cost of not changing viscerally real. When you start small and stay consistent. When you act before you feel ready. And when you decide, at the deepest level available to you, that you are worth the effort. That the person you are capable of becoming deserves the work of becoming them. Most people never change. You are not most people. You are someone who is willing to understand why change fails and to do the things that make it succeed. That is not nothing. That is everything. Begin.